Yo, what is going on, everybody? It is Bavarian, guys, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be ranking the BMW M3s from least to greatest. Now, I've been meaning to make this video for a while now, but unfortunately I've just been so busy and I just really haven't had time to really sit down and make this video. But today I finally had some time to do it, so I'm really excited to make this video. And I understand that this is going to be a very controversial video. Everybody's going to have their own opinion. Hey, I think the F80 M3 is the best. Hey, I think the E90, E92 M3 is the best. So leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you disagree with me, if you agree with me, just please let me know. This is all my opinion of being able to experience these cars, and they're all great cars. There's not one car on this list that I dislike, but some are better than others, and that's why we have to do a ranking. That's why I have to go through and discuss which one I believe is the best, which one I believe is the worst. So let's not waste any time and let's just get right into it. So there have been 6 generations of the BMW M3 and 4, and if you're unaware, for the F8X M3 and 4 that came out in 2015, they introduced the M4, which is the M3 Coupe essentially. So the M3 Coupe became the M4 along with the M4 convertible. So the F82 and F83 M4 was the first ever M4. So that brings us to number 6 on the list. We're going to go here from least to greatest, and that is going to be the F8X M3 and 4, which included the F80 M3 sedan, which was manufactured from 2015 to 2018, F82 M4 Coupe, which was manufactured from 2015 to 2020, as well as the F83 M4 convertible, which also was manufactured from 2015 to 2020. This was powered by a twin-turbo inline-6 S55 that produced 423 horsepower at the base model and 453 horsepower in the competition model. And you got 406 pound-feet of torque with the base model and 443 pound-feet of torque in the competition model. So let me just start off by saying that I do not dislike this car. In fact, I think this is a really good-looking car. I think it looks really, really good. I think it looks so modern, and I think they're hot-looking cars. But what really bothers me with the F8X M3 and 4 is the S55 and how it sounds. It is so groggy. It just sounds horrible. I haven't heard one setup that I've really liked, and obviously stock is like the worst thing you could do, and some people have like done muffler deletes and they've taken off the cats and all that. It's just like you're just making a horrible sound even louder. If you have a bad setup, then why would you even make it louder? And people have had to do a lot of work to make these cars sound better, and honestly they still don't really sound that great. So I hate the way these things sound. They sound so bad. They're so uninspiring to want to drive. The driving experience of this car is just so much more modern than it is in the E9X, the predecessor. It is so much more loose. The steering feels more loose, and I'm a big steering guy. That's why I'm a German automobile sports car enthusiast. Steering's a really big thing for me, and the steering in this car is still tight, compared to other cars, but it's so far off from what the E9X was, and honestly, I think the new G80, G82 actually steers tighter than this car, and this is when, they kind of transitioned to more of a modern M car, and, it's so much bigger than the E9X. It really is. It feels so much bigger. This is the first M3 and 4 where it really started to feel a lot bigger. And I really don't think this car handled the transition too well. This is the first M3 and 4 to ever get a turbo, right? So this is a twin-turbo inline-6. So it's pretty much the N55 with the tune and an extra turbo. That's essentially what this engine is, and I hate it. And people have even done turbo deletes where they have an S55 single turbo, and it does sound a little bit better, but it still sounds pretty bad. It still sounds pretty bad. The interior of this car, I guess this would be criticizing the F3X 3 Series/4 Series. I don't like the insides of these cars. The cabins are they're goofy. The design is very goofy. I don't like the way the screen's integrated in the car. I don't like the gauge cluster, how it says ready off. I think it's a goofy looking design inside. I don't like it. I really, really don't like it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and complain too much about the cabins of these cars and criticize the cabins of these cars, but I'm just not a fan. This car was offered in the 7-speed M double clutch transmission as well as the 6-speed manual transmission, and I feel like the DCT was much better suited with the S65 and the E9X. I don't think it's as fun with this car. I still think it's fun. I still think it's responsive, but I do like this car in a manual better. I do, and I think a lot of people say that, and that's also what I believe. I'm just a bigger manual fan than I am, a DCT PDK guy. I like the third pedal. I always feel like it's a much more fun experience. And as I said, I do not dislike this car in any way. The sound, just the sound, is what kills this car, at least for me. It just absolutely just kills this car. Again, I think it looks really, really good. I think this is one of the best looking M3 M4s ever. I think it looks fantastic, but just the sound is terrible. As I said, this is the first time that they pushed out the M4 with the coupe and convertible, and then the M3 became sedan only, which is really dumb. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, the M4 is the M3 coupe. I mean, that's essentially what it is. That's exactly what it is. The F82, as much as I don't like the G82, the F82 I do like a lot better. I think it looks so much better than the G82. So that is one positive I guess you could take out of this car. And there's a lot of torque. And honestly, this car doesn't really have much more horsepower than the E9X does. 423 at the base model. If you go take a look at E9X, it was 414, but the E9X had 295 pound-feet of torque, and this car has 406 pound-feet of torque. So, I mean, this car has so much more torque, and it feels like it's too much torque for the amount of horsepower. It feels like it's overly fast. It feels so much faster, even though it really isn't when you go take a look at the horsepower difference. That is pretty much it. F8X M3 and 4 ranked number 6 on this list. As I said, I don't dislike it, but I think this is where it belongs. It's not real inspiring to want to drive this car. Again, it still feels fairly stiff, especially in the competition. I mean, it definitely steers tighter in the competition. This is when they started increasing horsepower for the competition, when it wasn't just a ZCP competition package. You actually got an increase of horsepower. I mean, the ZCP also included a little bit of some tighter suspensions, things like that, as we'll discuss when we talk about the E46 and E9X. Moving on to number 5 on this list is going to be the G8X M3 and 4, which included the G80 M3 sedan, which began production in 2021, G81 M3 sedan touring, which is only available in Europe. And that came to be for the 2023 model year. The G82 M4 Coupe, which began production in 2021, as well as the G83 M4 Convertible, which also began production in 2021. This is powered by the S58, which, just like the S55, is an inline-6 twin-turbo. And I have to say, this engine sounds so much better than the S55. I just think because of the twin turbo, and they kind of had to transition to lower displacement with some turbos, and I think that they just didn't really handle the transition too well at the F8X, and I think that they were kind of able to revamp it a little bit and make the car sound better. I still not love it, the sound. I still think it sounds a tad bit groggy, but it sounds so much better, and it's so much easier to make it sound better. With the S55, it wasn't. This engine is so much easier to make it sound better, but this is a very controversial car, but I think this car may be the last of so many things, as I'll get into. I mean, you go take a look at a lot of BMW's competitors, and just go take a look at the automobile industry in general. There's a huge push for electric cars and hybrids and things like that, and heck, I mean, it's not a V8, but it's still an inline-6 twin-turbo, and they have still committed to sticking with this for a little while now, especially with the introduction of the G87 M2. So could this be the last M3 and 4 that is not offered in a hybrid variant? That's very, very possible. Maybe the next one isn't, and maybe this is the last M3 and 4 you can get into with the third pedal, with the manual transmission. I mean, it's definitely possible. If you go take a look at the horsepower, 500 horsepower with the competition model, 473 with the base model, and 413 pound-feet of torque with the base model, and 479 pound-feet of torque with the competition model. So this car is very, very fast, and again, it has so much torque like the F8X. And I like this car better than the F8X, obviously, since it is ranked higher than the F8X. But it's a goofy looking car. The big pig snout, as I like to call it. I mean, the big two front grills. It's just so goofy. It is so goofy on so many different levels, and it just seemed like they just went over the top, and they just tried to be obnoxious. And I can live with it a lot more on the G80 M3 sedan. I like a lot better than the G3 sedan. Honestly, I think maybe it looks better with some different colors. But the G82, G83, I can't stand the big grille on the coupes. I don't like the big grille on the coupes, and I write it off. As I mentioned, I like the F82 a lot better than I do the G82 from a look perspective. I think it looks so much better than the G82, G83. I think this car looks fantastic from the back. Like if you're like walking up from this car from the back and you're looking at the side, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a really hot car. And then you get up to the front, you're like, ooh, and you see that big front grille, and it looks so goofy. It just looks so goofy. And this is a really big car. It's bigger than the F8X, of course. Of course, they just keep getting bigger, but they keep adding more horsepower. But this is supposed to be a 3 Series. It's supposed to be a 3 Series, and it's basically the size of like an E65 series. It's just gotten so big and so fat. And I understand, yes, they have increased the horsepower, but it's just gotten so big. Don't get me wrong. We'll talk more about the feel of the car. This car definitely has a tighter steering, has a tighter suspension. At least I feel like it does. I like driving it more than I do the F8X. It feels a little bit more nimble, even though it's a little bit bigger. But it seems like it kind of veered back to BMW kind of veered back to what made them so great. And of course, this car isn't like, it doesn't drive like an old school BMW, not like an E46 or E36 or anything like that. But it's still, steers pretty nice. It steers better, much better than the F8X. So this car can be offered in two different transmissions: the ZF8 speed automatic and the 6-speed manual transmission. So you can only get the base model if you get a manual. So there's no manual in the competition. And it's not a competition package, it's just competition, right? So competition gets you 27 more horsepower than it does the base model. It gets you more torque, as I've run through before. But you can get competition rear-wheel drive and competition X-drive. This is the first M3 and 4 they offered in X-Drive, which I think is pretty interesting. I really don't like how you can't get this car into competition. They claim that the gearbox can't handle the amount of horsepower, which is ridiculous because the E16.5 had around 500 horsepower, the F10.5 had around 550. So they claim the gearbox can't handle the amount of horsepower, which I don't believe because they're able to do it before. So I don't really know how much truth there is to that. I do like this car better in the manual, and I just think that there's just something about driving a manual. You don't want too much horsepower. I understand it may sound like kind of stupid, like, heck, I mean, don't you want to drive fast? But, you don't want to be revving it to like, 3,000 to 4,000 RPM going like just dangerously high speeds. It's just too fast. It is too fast. You want to rev it out a little bit, right? When you're at operating tempo, you want to rev it out a little bit. You don't want to have to only rev it to like 3,000, 4,000 RPM. You want to rev it out a little bit, and you rev this car out, you're going to get arrested. It's so insanely fast. And I don't like that. I liked it when, in some of the older cars, even like the E9X and the E46, cars that didn't have as much torque, that you could rev them out and not have to worry about going dangerously high speeds. And again, this car is very impressive. It's so fast, it's so quick, and it's a wonderfully designed and engineered car. But it's still there's something missing from the soul of this car. Now I just want to talk a little about the ZF8 speed. The ZF8 speed is great in this car. They started just putting them in the F chassis non-M cars. That's when the ZF8 speeds kind of started to be put into BMW chassis, and then they just started to work their way into the M cars. It all started with the F85, F86, X5, X6M. And now they're in all the M cars because they've just gotten so advanced, and they've just come such a long way. One thing about this, I mean, it's definitely quicker than the DCT, even though the DCT was really fast and snappy. But the downshifts feel a little automatic-y. They don't have like that jolt and that dramatic experience like the DCT would give you. But they're still pretty cool. The downshifts are still pretty cool. I still enjoy downshifting, but it's definitely a little bit more dramatic with the DCT. So overall, I think this car is very impressive. I think the color schemes are very goofy. The amount of colors you can get this car in. The seats, a lot of these happen to have bucket seats. I'm not a big fan. I don't really think they're that comfortable. And I think that you have to getting out of these seats are just a big pain in the butt. I do not enjoy getting out of these seats because it seems like they just sit so low. But this car is very heavily marketed. There's like an M badge everywhere. Heck, it is an M car. But this car certainly, doesn't fail to remind you that it is an M car. G8X M3 and 4 ranked number 5. Moving on to number 4 on this list, a lot of people may be surprised because it feels like this is such a beloved car throughout the community. And this is going to be the E46 M3, which included the M3 Coupe and convertible, which were both manufactured from 2001 to 2006. So the E46 M3 was powered by a normally aspirated inline-six, so the S54, which produced 333 horsepower and 262 pound-feet of torque. So don't get me wrong, I am not an E46 chassis hater. I used to own a ZHP sedan in all red 6-speed manual. I loved that car. So I love the E46 chassis. I love the feel of it. Even the cosmetics of the car. I love it inside and out. But there's a few glaring problems I have with the E46 M3. I think first of all, I think the driving experience of this car is fantastic. It steers so wonderfully. It's an old school BMW, and it's starting to become a classic, right? I mean, you're starting to see these cars really go up and hold their value really well. It has such a great feel to it. It's so small, it's so nimble, you can still toss it around, and it's still relatively quick. I mean, 333 horsepower, it's certainly not bad. It could keep up with like a B58. The B58's right around like 333 non-M40. If it's an M40, it gets 382, but non-M40 B58, it's around 338. So it's still relatively quick. I mean, it's still relatively quick. I wouldn't say it's like like fast. It's certainly not like the E30 that's certainly starting to show that it's really not that powerful anymore. So clearly, this car was not offered in a sedan, and that's one thing that I really am not happy about with the E46 M3, and that's why they came out with the ZHP in 2003. It was sedan only for 2003. I don't want to make this video all about a ZHP, but sedan only in 2003, manual only in 2003, and then in 2004 they came out with the coupe and convertible, and they also offered an automatic variant. But come on, I mean, I don't understand. To have the E36 M3 offered in a sedan, from 97 to 98, and then they do not bring it back for the E46, and I think that was a big mistake because I've never really been a big fan of E46 coupes. I don't know, I just don't really like the way they look as much. I like the four-door look with the E46. I love E46 sedans. Again, that's why I owned a ZHP. That was a sedan, but still, this car is such a classic, and it's really hard to dislike this car. I still love the E46 M3, but there's, again, a few other glaring problems. I do not like the way the S54 sounds. Now, it doesn't sound as bad as the S55 with that grogginess. It's a totally different sound. It's like this tiny raspiness, so you get around like 3,000, 4,000 RPM. And it just sounds so terrible. It just sounds like a Honda Accord with a muffler delete. It sounds horrible. It's a terrible sounding exhaust, and again, like I mentioned with the S55 or the F8X, it's just people have had to work so hard to make these cars sound good, and to me, it's just not worth it. They have had to do so much work to make these cars sound good, and it's just like it's just not worth it in my opinion. And I love the way this car looks, even though again you can't get in a sedan. I still think this car looks fantastic. I love the front of it. It's just starting to show the classic BMW now. It's starting to kind of enter that phase, and it reminds me of the time where BMW was just making so many great cars and were just producing so many great chassis. I mean, the Big Brother E39 M5 and the E38 7 Series. This is also around the time when the E53 X5 came out, the 83 X3. So this was just a wonderful time to buy BMW. It really represents such a good time for BMW, and when they really held that slogan, the ultimate driving machine, which I still believe they hold. But these cars definitely have more soul than the new ones. They definitely have more of an analog feel. Clearly, I mean, this obviously has hydraulic steering, but this is the last normally aspirated inline six in an M3. So this is it, the S54, which is a fairly reliable motor. Now, sort of like the S65, if you didn't do your regular oil changes, and if you really didn't take great care of the engine, then the rod bearings would sometimes be an issue with the S54. But for the most part, it was a pretty reliable motor. Just like the ENX, you could opt not to get the nav, and most of these cars were not spec'd out with nav, but the later models were. Clearly, you don't want nav because it's just so outdated, so you just don't want that. But a lot of these cars were not spec'd out with nav. But Mole Red, Interlagos Blue, I mean, there's so many fantastic colors that you could spec these cars out with. And another big negative, this car was offered in two different transmissions, the manual transmission and the SMG2, which was horrible. The SMG2 was clunky, unresponsive, and it felt so old, and it didn't feel like BMW. It really didn't feel like BMW. It felt very unlike BMW to come out with a transmission as bad as the SMG2. The E60 M5 got SMG3, and then the E36 M3 Euro specs got SMG1, which I can't even imagine how bad that must have been, because the SMG, some people say they noticed the difference between SMG2 and SMG3. I noticed no difference between SMG2 and the E46 and the SMG3 and the E60. No difference. Absolutely no difference between the two. I mean, as I said, maybe there is. I just don't really notice it, but it's clunky, it's unresponsive, and they're unreliable. Now, I'm going to go back to the argument of, again, I think that a lot of people beat on their cars when they're cold, and they don't let them properly warm up, and I think that can have an effect on the transmission, the engine, clearly, on the whole chassis in general, and I think that that's possibly what's happened to people's SMG transmissions, but they're known to fail. The SMG transmissions are known to fail. They're not well designed. They're clunky. They're old. I hate SMG. I just don't like it, and that's one thing that really goes against this car. And a lot of people manual swap the SMGs. They bought cars, the E46s spec'd out with the SMG, and they manual swapped them. This car in a manual is fantastic. I mean, pretty much no surprise. It's fantastic. It has that rubbery feel to the transmission like most BMWs have, but I like that. I pretty much was like born and raised on that clutch and that feel to transmission, so I can kind of relate to that. I don't really know any different. I mean, I've driven a lot of other cars that have been stick, like Fiats and Mazdas and Hondas and things like that, and they definitely have a different feel, but I really like that rubby feel. People are very torn on it, but I like it. I do like it. This car also was the first M3 to get a competition package. It was called ZCP Competition Package. It was made available for the 2005 and 2006 model year of this chassis. So it got you nicer wheels, a little bit of a lower suspension, a little bit of a stiffer suspension. So it was no increase of horsepower at this point, but it was a really, really cool package. And the ZCP cars have really held their value even better than the non-ZCP cars. So E46 M3 ranked number 4. And moving on here to number 3. Is going to be the E36 M3, which included the M3 Coupe from 1995 to 1999, the M3 Sedan, which was manufactured from 97 to 98, the M3 Convertible, which is manufactured from 97 to 99. So for the 95 model year, only for the 95 model year, you got the S50, which was a normally aspirated inline 6, and then the 96, you got the S52, which was also normally aspirated inline 6. There was no increase of horsepower between the S50 and S52, but there was about 11 more pound-feet of torque with the S52. So it definitely was worth getting. I mean, the non-95 models clearly hold their value a little bit more than the 95 models. Just simply because there's 11 more pound-feet of torque, it's a little bit more desirable. It's a little bit more desirable, but I love the E36 M3, and I think it's really underrated because I think when people think E36 M3, they get instantly mad because of the fact that the Eurospec E36 M3s were tremendously better. They got more horsepower. They look better. Of course, they got different cosmetics outside the car. They got a lot more cooler, front bumper, different side skirts, things like that. I mean, they look better. And again, they got more horsepower, they got more torque. They were better cars, and I think people get mad about that. Believe me, I don't like it either, but let's not forget that the North American market still got a good E36 M3. It still was good. I mean, clearly it wasn't like the Euro specs, but it still was great. I love how this M3 was offered in a sedan. It looks so good. But the E36 M3 overall just looks fantastic. It looks so old school now. It just was such a simple design. It's when they really didn't try to overthink it like they do now with the big grille. I love those square headlights. I just think that looks really OG. I think it's really, held up really well, and the look has really held up well. And even the cosmetics of the car. A lot of these cars don't have leather; they just have cloth. My dad actually used to have an M3 lightweight, which was a really rare edition of the E36 M3. Didn't even have an air conditioner. Didn't even have a radio. It was pretty much just a race car. I mean, that's why they call it a lightweight. It was white with some M racing stripes on the front hood. Again, this is when they really cared about their slogan, the ultimate driving machine. They cared more about the experience, not so much about the cosmetics, inside the car and things like that. This car was offered in the manual transmission, and it was offered in a torque converter automatic transmission, which was just absolutely horrible. I mean, you didn't even have a manual option. You couldn't even paddle shift or anything like that. It was just basically like the same transmission that they would just put in like a regular, just generic 3 Series. It was just, it was horrible. I do not like the automatic E36 M3s. The Eurospecs, as I mentioned when I was talking about the E46, the Eurospecs did get SMG1, which honestly that was a little bit better because at least you had a manual option. But the automatic E36 M3s clearly are just so much lower in value than the manuals. But a lot of people that buy these automatic E36 M3s manual swap them, then they may flip them to bring in some cash. And honestly, that's a pretty smart decision because the automatics are just so boring. 240 horsepower. I drive an F25 X3 every day, X-Drive 28i. With the N20, so the N20 is right around 240 horsepower. So this basically has the same amount of horsepower as the N20. So it's still not a dog in today's standards. Of course, when you compare it in like a sports car market, it's still decent. It's not like the 333 horsepower from the S54, but it's certainly not bad. It just feels so good. It just feels so natural. The feel, the steering of this car obviously feels fantastic because it's in that area where they really put a lot of attention and detail with the hydraulic steering and the really, really stiff suspension. And they just, even like the steering wheel doesn't even have have like like a roundel on them. It's just embedded into the steering wheel. They don't have like an actual roundel on the at least in the North American specs. I like that. It just was so simple. That's all they really cared about. It wasn't all this razzmatazz and all this, doing this crazy stuff. They cared about the driving experience. That's why they made the car. That is why they made the car. So a lot of great colors. I mean, I love the Dakar yellow. I mean, I love that color. You got to see a few E9Xs that got the Dakar yellow individual, but this was a mainstream color on the E36. You didn't have to special order this at all, and that's probably like one of my favorite specs. Dakar yellow. They look fantastic, and the way these cars smell inside. It's just like that old school BMW smell. There's nothing like it. They smell fantastic, and the new ones really don't smell like that. They really don't. So E36 M3 ranked number 3, and as I said, I think a lot of people just dislike this car because of the fact that they feel like we kind of got the shaft, and we did. But we still got a good one. We still got a good version of this car. It just obviously wasn't as good as the Euro specs. Moving on here, number 2 is going to bring us to the E30 M3, which included the M3 Coupe, and that was the only variant that the North American market got, and that was produced from 1988 to 1991. Now, in Europe, they did offer this in a convertible variant, and if you head up to Princeton, New Jersey for SIGFest in September, you will see some E30 M3s are actually convertibles, where people have imported them in from Europe, which is pretty cool. I've had a chance of seeing a few of those as well, and unfortunately, they didn't make them over here. But this car represents so much about BMW's history. It is a fantastic car for so many different reasons. It is powered by the S14, which is a normally aspirated little inline 4-cylinder with 192 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque. And this clearly represents, this is a perfect example of a car that you don't buy for the horsepower. You buy it for the experience, and the experience driving this car is fantastic. It is fantastic. I mean, you really have to rev this car if you want any sort of power from the S14. You really have to rev this thing out if you want any sort of horsepower at all. And it's the feel of this car is just so analog. It's just so bare bones. And this car is really what helped earn BMW the slogan "Ultimate Driving Machine," because this car is an ultimate driving machine. The way it steers, the way it feels, the way the clutch feels, it's just so analog. It feels like the car is a part of you. You really feel like you're a part of the car when you drive this car. And they don't make them like this anymore. They really don't make them like this anymore. They've come such a long way from this, and I'm not saying that in a positive way. They have really come a long way from this. I understand with a lot of the new modern technology, the driving experience is just naturally going to be different, with things like auto rev matching and things like that, but there's something so special about this car. I said, okay, we want to make another M car, and let's make it for the 3 Series. Let's make an M3, and that's exactly what this car represents. It is the first ever M3, and it was one of those cars where like, what could we get away with? What can we do? And it doesn't have an M badge in every little square inch of the car. It's very simple. It has an M badge M3 on the back. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. There isn't all this razzmatazz to it. It's very basic and very down to the business. Oh my gosh, this car just puts a smile on my face, and I think a question has to be asked is it worth it? Is it worth what these cars are going for right now? Because they are just absolutely just blowing up on the internet. If you even look at Bring a Trail or anything like that, these cars are really holding up their value well, and they've just skyrocketed over the last 5 to 6, 7 years. And I would not pay for what they're going for right now, because if you go take a look at the E36 M3s, which are cheaper, a lot cheaper than the E30s, you get a little bit more horsepower, and you get a very similar experience. The E36 is very similar to this driving experience, in my opinion. But 192 horsepower isn't enough for me. I still need a little bit more than that. So that's why I wouldn't get this car. I love what this car represents. I love the way it looks. It looks so old school. It's like that ultimate German sports car of the 80s. But still, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it just simply because of the fact that I'd like a little bit more horsepower, and I just don't feel like they're worth what they're going for. But it's no knock to this chassis. It's no knock to the E30 M3. I still think it's a wonderful car for so many different reasons, especially for what it represents. I love the E30 M3. The way this car sounds is not bad. It basically sounds like a 325 with just a little bit of a deeper tone to it. But this car still is fantastic, and I love it. So moving on here to number 1, I'm sure a lot of people thought this would be here after I announced the E30 M3 would be ranked number 2 if you just followed the process of elimination. And why would this not be here? This will bring us to the E9X M3, which included the E90 M3 sedan, which is manufactured from 2008 to 2011, the E92 M3 Coupe, which is manufactured from 2008 to 2013, and the E93 M3 Convertible, which was manufactured from 2008 to 2013. I absolutely love this car for so many different reasons. I mean, this car is the bomb. It really is the bomb. It is just incredible. I mean, it's an incredible feel. This car is just, the feeling that this car gives you is just insane. I mean, it's powered by
S65,
which is a normally aspirated V8 that pushes out 414 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque, which is not much torque for 414 horsepower, as I've alluded to earlier in this video while talking about the F80 and F82. The torque ratio really isn't that high, but this is the best sounding M car ever. Obviously the E60 M5, the E63, E64 M6 got the S85 normally aspirated V10, which is basically the same engine as the S65 with just 2 more cylinders. And honestly, I think it sounds fantastic, but I don't think it sounds as good. I think the V8 sounds better. I think it has a nicer tone to it. Don't get me wrong, I do not dislike the S85 one bit. It's just my personal taste. I think the S65 sounds a little bit better. There's just something so special about it. Even people that are running stock, and I understand that stock really isn't that loud. And I certainly wouldn't recommend running stock because, again, it's just you need something a little bit louder. But they still sound fantastic. It's not like the E46 M3 or F80 M3 or the F82 M4, where it just sounds so terrible. It just sounds so terrible. I mean, this car still sounds wonderful with the stock setup. You just need to make it a little bit louder. I love the fact that they brought back the sedan for the M3. I love that. I love what they did with that. And unfortunately, the sedan variant was the E90 only was manufactured for 4 model years, while the E92 and E93 manufactured for 6 model years. And in 2011, they came out with the ZCP competition package, which was originally on the E46 for 05 and 06. And it gave you, again, just like the E46, bigger wheels, a little bit of lower suspension, some more stiffer suspension, steers a little bit tighter. Fortunately, the E90 M3 only got it 1 year. And if you haven't gone to go check out my other video where I talk about why the E9X M3 is a really special car and why it's one of the most special cars of all time, please go check that out. And it's going to be linked in the description section. I talk more about this in depth. But here in the ranking video, I'm just going to touch on a little bit more. I love the fact that the E90 and E92 look different because the E36 M3 Coupe and sedan do look a little bit different on the tail end, but it's really not anything too noticeable. The taillights are slightly different. The E90 and E92, they look much different, and I like the look of the E90 a little bit better. I think it looks a little bit more aggressive. That's no knock to the E92 chassis at all. But I love the way these cars look. I still think they look fairly modern with the LED taillights for LCI. Of course, LCI for the E90 M3 came out in 2009, and for the E92 and E93 came out in 2011. And as I mentioned before, the E93 M3 did not get a ZCP competition package, just simply because it feels like the E93 M3 is kind of like the forgotten redheaded stepchild of the E9X M3 variant. Nobody really talks about the E93 because there just isn't a huge market for convertibles in the BMW community, at least not that I feel, not that I see on social media. And of course, they wouldn't make it if there wasn't some sort of market for it, but there definitely seems to be much more enthusiasm around the E90 and E92. So this car was offered with a 7-speed M double clutch transmission and the 6-speed manual transmission. I feel like this is a car where you really can't go wrong with either. I mean, they both are incredibly fun for so many different reasons. And if you're more of a horsepower kind of guy and horsepower is more your thing and you're all about speed, and the DCT is going to be your kind of thing. And the DCT in this car is a blast. But I'm a big manual fan, and I prefer this car in a manual much more than I do the DCT. I have looked at a few DCTs in the past, but I really like this car in a manual much more, just simply because I just like the feel. I'm just more of a manual fan. I'm always going to choose the manual because I just love that more of an analog feel. This is the last M3 that got hydraulic steering. The F8X and 3 and 4 was the start of electric steering, and again, it really didn't handle that transition too well. And it just feels so right anytime you step inside this car. At least for me, it does. It feels so right. And this is the last M3 you can get that didn't have nav. and that's what they call a single hump. As I also mentioned in my other video before, if you opt not to get nav, it's called the stripper spec. And a lot of those come with the manual transmission. I mean, there's a few single humps that are DCTs. I have seen that occasionally, but it does seem like primarily most of the single humps are 6-speed manuals. It seems to me as if most of them are, and you get the speed cloth. Like that's like the stereotypical. So that's basically like what they call the stripper spec. And if you opt not to get these cars in sunroof, unfortunately the E90 didn't get the carbon fiber roof, but you could opt to get a slick top. So you didn't have to get the sunroof, but the E92 you could get the carbon fiber roof, and that just looks fantastic. There are some issues with it. If you don't wax it on a regular basis, you're going to get kind of like a yellow hue to it. That's very common. A lot of people have had issues with that, but that's just due to neglect. It's nobody's fault but their own. If you choose not to keep up with the car, then that's just your fault. BMW shouldn't have to be responsible for that. Everybody loves to, everybody in the community seems to just love to harp on this car and attack this engine, the S65, and oh my gosh, this thing's a dog down below. Oh my gosh, this thing is it doesn't have enough torque. I'm tired of hearing that. If you don't like this, if you don't like the setup, then you supercharge it, or you just go out and find another car. Then this isn't the car for you, because guess what? I like a car where you have to rev out the car. And the thing I find funny about that is that the same people that are complaining about this are the same people that criticize the F8X and V4 for having too much torque, like I do. But at the same time, they're criticizing the S65 for not having enough torque. So which isn't, you can't have both. So you got to choose one side or the other. And I think clearly it doesn't have much torque. I mean, it's no secret, but I'm fine with that. I like that because I like a car where you have to rev it out. I love it, and you don't have to worry about getting arrested or getting a ticket or anything like that. I mean, you could just have fun, and it sounds so loud and it just sounds so good. And there's so many different exhaust setups you could do with this car to make it sound fantastic. I mean, it already sounds great from stock, but it's just not loud enough. That's the problem. It's just not loud enough. I think taking the cats off is too loud. A lot of people love to criticize this engine. Oh my gosh, did you do your rod bearings? Oh my gosh, did you do your throttle actuators? And listen, I understand that BMW is not free of their problems, as shown with the N62, which was an absolute disaster. The N63, the early N63s were absolute disasters. But a lot of this is just so overblown, and a lot of people that say this are the same people that pull their car out of the driveway and they immediately rev it to high RPM. And when it's not warm, it's not operating temp, they just beat on it, and it's just not designed for that. It's not made for that. A lot of people that say this are the people that supercharge their engines. They tune their engines for an insane amount of horsepower, and then they wonder why these kind of things fail. Now, I'm not saying that this is every single situation, everything's like this, but it's so overblown. It is so overblown. The whole rod bearing throttle actuator thing is so overblown. People need to calm down. I'm not saying it's not an issue, because it certainly can be an issue at times. But a lot of people that say this also are the kind of people that go a long stretch and span without doing oil changes. It's an M car. You shouldn't be going more than you shouldn't be going 10,000 miles between oil changes. You should be going a lot less than that. You should be doing oil changes a lot more frequently. It is a high performance engine. And people don't seem to understand it, and they wonder why the rod bearings fail. They wonder why the throttle actuators fail. Now, was it the greatest design in the world? No, but it is so overblown. It is so overblown. My dad actually has a Lime Rock, and not only is it a Lime Rock, but he has a single hump Lime Rock, a 6-speed manual single hump Lime Rock, which is extremely rare. 1 to 50 in a manual transmission on a Lime Rock, and maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 in a single hump 6-speed. I know I've seen 1 or 2 out there, but it's an extremely rare spec. But he actually is running the Eisenman race setup, and maybe we wish it was a little bit louder, but it still sounds fantastic. It's loud enough for his liking. So this M3 did get some special editions. It did get the GTS that came out in 2010, which I never really understood. A lot of people did LCI swap the taillights, but that pretty much alludes to what I'm about to say. 2010 was the final year of non-LCI, so I got the old taillights. I don't understand why they just didn't wait for 11. And then I got the Lime Rock Park Edition for the 2013 model year. 200 models made, 150 in DCT, and then the other 50 were the 6-speed manual. This car, it just puts a smile on my face. It's just so loud. They drive fantastic, and it's just the sound is what really gets me into this car. I actually do currently own an 06 E90 330 6-speed manual that kind of replaced the ZHP. That's a really fun car. So I've kind of had a chance to interact with the E9X community a little bit, but I hope to tap into the S65 platform at some point. I really want an E90. I think the E90 looks a little bit better. I would never turn away from the E92 though. I can guarantee you that. So Guys, that was a pretty long video, so if you did stick around to the end, thank you so much. But I think I had a lot to cover. I had a lot to talk about, and I hope to make some other videos in the future. And I do not dislike any of these cars. In fact, I think all of them are so special for so many different ways. So please go check out my Instagram. I'll have it linked in the description section. Bavarian Guys on Instagram. So I hope to make another video soon. I'm Luke, and I'll talk to you later. I'll see you guys.